to you, I think a lot of you may well have heard me say before, but it bears some repeating. I think more than answer questions or clarify questions, I want to raise a couple of questions which I think we all need to address in the future, in the near future. There's been a lot of talk about what will happen in Geneva at the end of the week, what the repercussions, etc. will be. And a lot of it has been exaggerated in that we've been told by various people that the whole purpose of what is happening in Geneva is to change the government of the country, is to take the chief executive to the elected chair, is to haul up various officers of the Sri Lankan army and charge them with war crimes, etc., because the rest of the world is really quite jealous and envious of our success against terrorism. And of course we're also told that really this is all about a flashback to imperialism. The country is going to be taken over, its sovereignty is going to be violated. Interestingly, the things that have been talked about as the consequences of what will happen as a result of Geneva are not the things that are actually happening. More to the point, what happened in the Valley 4 or 5 days ago is much more clearly what the consequences of Geneva and the situation in our country is going to be like. Let me just clarify for a moment, as most of you will know, at the international level, there is no punishment of taking anyone to the elected chair. Secondly, of course, this is a resolution in the United Nations Human Rights Council. It is not mandatory, it's not compulsory in terms of compliance. The only United Nations institution or arm that can enforce anything is the Security Council. And in the Security Council, there are 5 permanent members, 2 of which are on record pledging to prevent, leave aside veto, prevent the issue of Sri Lanka coming up before the Security Council. Thirdly, therefore, as a consequence, it follows quite logically that there are no sanctions that a Human Rights Council resolution can impose on Sri Lanka. Individual countries could decide on certain punitive actions, but as a resolution and as a collective body, as a Human Rights Council, there are no sanctions that can be imposed. Now let's look at the resolution a little while before we go on to looking at what its possible and apparent consequences are going to be. As you all know, this is the third one that's going to come in Council, 2012, 2013, and now 2014. 12 and 13 basically were extremely mild resolutions, which constituted, in my opinion, more of an appeal to the government of Sri Lanka to speedily implement the provisions of the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission. But both resolutions did also note one other thing. They said that when it came to the question of accountability in respect of the allegations of war crimes and crimes against humanitarian law, that there were shortcomings, and the government of Sri Lanka needed to take steps to address these shortcomings. They were not satisfied in 12, they were not satisfied in 13, and hence we come to 14. If one looks for a moment at 12 and 13, there are 2 points that I want to make. The first one is that not just in 2012 and 2013, but go as far back as 2006, 7, and 8, when we got the first commission of investigations into 16 egregious cases of human rights violations, with an international independent group of eminent persons attached to it. then we got LLRC, then we got LLRC Action Plan. I say to you that none of these things would have happened if not for international pressure, which at that point and since has been focused in Geneva. All of these actions have their shortcomings, but I say to you we would not have got them if there wasn't that pressure in Geneva. You have a government which does the minimum necessary to forestall international criticism, and it keeps trying to postpone the inevitable. But what is also becoming clear is that the longer you take to address these questions, the more the available information and evidence with regard to the charges comes out. Now we are faced with a situation in which you have reports which turn around and say that the government of Sri Lanka is guilty of destroying evidence with regard to human rights violations and the allegations of war crimes. So without that international pressure, you would have got the little bit that one has got in the first place. Yeah. I think that's very important to remember, because a lot of people turn around and say that the international pressure is irrelevant, that at the end of the day it is more harmful. The question therefore is harmful to whom and what, and if there wasn't that, would there have been an LLRC? Would there have been a national action plan? And I don't think we would have got either of them. The second point with regard to what happened in 2012 and 13, and indeed coming down from 2006, is this. We are in a post-war situation. We are not in a post-conflict situation. And therein lies our tragedy. The guns have fallen silent. But the sources of conflict that led to that war are being sustained. They are being reproduced, and new sources of conflict are being brought onto the agenda. Like, for example, the attacks on religious freedom in terms of the Muslim community and the evangelical Christian community in particular. We have gone back, not forward. At the beginning of this year, Mr. Lalit Veeratunga, the Secretary of the President, who is the head of the National Action Plan Committee, the committee to actually implement the LLRC, made the point in Washington that we should have 5 years in which to do all of these things, starting from 2012, not from 2009. Furthermore, he also did say that if there was an international investigation that came as a consequence of the resolution, there would be chaos. Now, I think this was less of an exercise in political prophecy than it was a threat. Yeah. We have put onto the agenda more things that challenge reconciliation, conflict resolution, democracy, whatever else you want to think of. The idea of Sri Lanka as a multi-religious, multi-ethnic, formal, functioning, albeit flawed, democracy is under serious challenge today than it has ever been before. You have a military which is arguably the strongest arm of government in this country today. And it's not just looking at national security narrowly conceived. It is involved in the economy as well. It is involved in civil governance. It is involved in taking private land from private citizens in this country. You have no rule of law. That was epitomized at the end of the day by the fake, bogus impeachment of the Chief Justice. And I say this today, a day in which all those cases in the Supreme Court, including some filed by the Center for Policy Alternatives and myself, challenging the appointment of Mohan Peiris as Chief Justice of this country, have all been dismissed. There was a point, if you remember, and it was not that long ago, when the apex courts of this country, the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal, ruled that that impeachment process was illegal and unconstitutional. If somebody had a change of heart and decided otherwise. We know of any number of cases where indictments are never filed, and if filed, are never brought to fruition because there is political interference in the entire judicial process. Again, I give you one simple example that comes up. Some of you may well remember the example, the case of Qurem Sheikh, a British humanitarian worker who came with his girlfriend to spend a holiday in Tangala in December 2010, I think. There was a drunken brawl, he was killed, and his girlfriend was raped. The chief suspect in that incident was the chairperson of the Tangala Pradesh Sabha. Nothing happened with regard to that case. Nothing happened with regard to that case until 2013, the year of children, and we wanted the British Prime Minister to come to Sri Lanka. We may have regretted it subsequently, but we wanted him to come. And, surprise, surprise, the Attorney General directly indicts the chairperson of the Tangala Pradesh. It took 2 years, 2 and something months. Then I ask you, with regard to the rule of law, what about the countless amount of photographs and videos of attacks on mosques, shops, prayer halls, churches? Has anyone been taken in? Anyone been indicted? The Prevention of Terrorism Act is on the statute books, and it is used. It is used against people on the grounds that they foment communal disharmony and strife. What do these attacks on mosques and prayer meetings and prayer halls and churches constitute? Genuine acts of reconciliation? How absurd, ridiculous and surreal has our life become when you have people spewing out hate on public television, on state-funded television, no, on broadcast media funded by you and me as taxpayers, spewing out hate. So all of these things have now come together to make the point that the trajectory, the way things are developing in Sri Lanka, is not in the direction of genuine national unity and reconciliation, but rather the reverse. Rather the reverse. So what we have there is a resolution, the second draft, which was tabled on the 14th of this month in Geneva, emphasizes all of these things. It also makes the point that a political settlement of the conflict is important, is integral to reconciliation, that provincial councils should be given the authority and resources under the constitution of the country, under the constitution of the country to function. It's interesting, I read an article by Lanka, the candidate from the JHU, who is the spokesperson, I think, for the JHU, who is also a candidate in the provincial council election, Nishat Kavarna Singh. I read an interview with him the other day, where amazing and very interesting, very revealing. He says that C.V. Vigneswaran is more dangerous than Velupulle Prabhakar, because C.V. Vigneswaran is using the constitution of the country in the pursuit of his interests. Now, if you use the constitution of the country, you are dangerous, or you're more dangerous. I think basically if you're Tamil and in politics you're dangerous, then it depends on the degrees of danger if you use the constitution or if you use the T56 or a suicide bomb. I mean, this is the absurdities to which we are coming at the present moment. So what is it doing, this resolution? It is talking about all of those things. It is saying, look, implement the constructive elements of the LLRC. However, we will continue to monitor. So, the Office of the High Commissioner is being asked to monitor progress or the lack thereof with respect to the implementation of the LLRC. There is also a request for a credible mechanism within the country to look at these various allegations of crimes. In addition to that, and this I suppose is the most important and arguably the more controversial element, the Office of the High Commissioner is being asked to mount an independent international investigation into the allegations of war crimes and egregious human rights violations. So for the first time, you will get, if that resolution is passed, an investigation under the aegis of a UN organ or a UN body to look into these various allegations. Furthermore, the High Commissioner is being asked, as she was asked in 2013, to give an oral report on all of this in September 2014 and a final comprehensive report in March 2015. Now, I think it's going to happen. All the available evidence suggests that it's going to happen. And let me share with you my own personal experience. I happened to be in Geneva for 4 days and spoke with a lot of countries who are voting members. As you know, 47 countries will vote. 47 countries will vote for voting members. And quite a few of them who are disposed to support the government of Sri Lanka are really quite surprised at the attitude of the government of Sri Lanka in respect of the international community and this resolution. They feel that it is difficult to support a government that is at times being so negative and combative that instead of cooperating with the international communities, they go to the extent of insulting it. In 2012, I was in Geneva in 2012 and 13. In 2012, we behaved so badly in terms of the official representatives of the government of Sri Lanka that the President of the Council had to turn around and say that this is not behavior to be accepted in an international forum. The High Commissioner too put out a statement to that effect. Those of us who went, we were photographed, we were hooted, we were baracked, we were insulted. Poor Sandhya Ragnaligoda, Prageet Ragnaligoda's wife, is probably the one who got the worst of it. There were from members of parliament to so-called editors of newspapers. I call them so-called because I really can't understand how they could be called anything else, who were brought along, something like 150 in all, for some circus which did the country a great disservice. And that is another point, I think, that also needs to be flagged in all of this, in terms of the consequences of Geneva. Our foreign policy is in pieces. Our foreign policy is in pieces. The Sri Lankan Foreign Minister at the high-level section of the Human Rights Council read out a speech in which he openly criticized the Secretary General of the United Nations. A year ago, the Sri Lankan representative verged on insulting the High Commissioner. No one clapped, no one came and shook his hand after he made his speech this time. Then, and this is the irony of the whole thing, a foreign ministry which is headed by a professor of law puts out a statement about arrest and release under PTA, which is factually incorrect. Who is running the show? Some of you may also know, and it's worth pointing out in this case, and I'm not trying to make a political point, in arguably the strongest, most important capital city of the world, Washington, D.C., the Sri Lankan mission there has only one career foreign service officer. The foreign policy of the country in Washington, D.C. has been rented out to do public relations work. And we, you and I, are paying millions of rupees a month for them to do a whole lot of things, arrange meetings, write speeches for the Sri Lankan representative in Washington, insulting to the morale of the entire foreign service and to the dignity and self-respect of this country. But I think what we need to focus on in terms of Geneva, yes, the international investigation will come. We probably won't allow any of those investigators to step foot on Sri Lankan soil. As a consequence, they will have to do their investigation based on available evidence outside. And to the extent possible, if people can, if they so wish, go out and give evidence to them, or do it through electronic means, without ending up in Pusa, they can do so. Now, the question here though is that how is this government going to react to it? The investigation may well be 3 persons, it might be 1 person. It could be a special rapporteur on Sri Lanka, it could be some sort of eminent judge who is put in charge of an investigation. But the important thing here is that the government is making sure that it does everything to prevent and stop the flow of information from the ground with regard to past and continuing violations. That is the real significance, I think, of what happened to Jay Kumari and her daughter, and they're still inside. What happened with regard to Father Praveen and to Ruki, and what has been happening in the Rani in particular over the last 3 and 4 days with the extensive coordinate search operations and more arrests. Why is it that governments dislike us? Why is it that they call us traitors? Why is it that they say that we are in the pay of foreign governments and that we are really wanting to undermine the sovereignty of our own country? And I say to you, the reason is very simple. The reason is because we are able and willing, and I think more importantly, dare to provide the counter-narrative to the propaganda that is spewed out by the government media and government politicians. We provide an alternative about what is happening on the ground. We do that because we have networks with our fellow citizens where information is gathered, corroborated, and released in statements, in meetings, in documents, in policy briefs, etc. That's what they don't like. That is exactly what they don't like, and that is what they are going to stop. Secondly, they are going to use the argument of a revived LTTE to maintain the PTA on the statute book, the Prevention of Terrorism Act on the statute book, and also to maintain the military presence at the current levels in the north and east. If you take the accounts that have been given with regard to what happened in Jack Mari's house, it's amazing. You have evidence that this individual, Gobi, has been sent or come from somewhere, some say Switzerland, coincidentally, to revive the LTT. You hear that he is seeking refuge in Jack Mari's house. Now, this is in an area where there is a not inconsiderable military presence. So you send 2 or 3 people, a team we're told, but when you read the accounts, it's maybe 2, 3 or 4 at the most, to apprehend this man. And then you're told, as in the DBS Jarraj account, that you didn't expect the man to be armed, because someone fired a shot, and someone got hit in the leg and in the thigh or groin or something. Really? You didn't think the man would be armed? And then what happens? He runs away. And the police there are naturally concerned about taking their colleague to hospital and are unable to catch this man, who is still around. Who is still around. It all sounds very, very strange to me, because A, for a start, the LTT are supposed to be comprehensively defeated. B, our security forces indeed are supposed to be so efficient that they're not only doing security, they're doing a lot of other things as well. How come? How come Gobi managed to escape? Then we have the incidents that happened 2 days ago, where poor Ruki was followed. A vehicle was supposed to be on national alert. A vehicle was put on national alert as being a vehicle that is to carry Gobi around, and it was stopped. Where is all of this coming? Why would all of this happen at the time when arguably the most important resolution on Sri Lanka is being discussed in Geneva? Who is taking the decisions? Are they taking it in full knowledge of the political implications? Are they doing it deliberately? Are they doing it because they don't care? Or are they doing it because they don't know? On any one of those counts, we as citizens have every right to criticize them. Every right to criticize them if that's the kind of governance that we have. So the real challenge, I think, to us in terms of Geneva is that there is going to be a clamp down on the flow of information from the ground, which will be critical of the government. We will see the PTA being used more and more. Anyone who has talked about being associated in any way with someone who they can claim to be LTT will be brought under suspicion. Will be brought under suspicion. So the darkness is descending in order to stifle civil society, stifle dissent, prevent that alternative narrative from getting out. Now we as civil society have to ask ourselves as to whether it is indeed match over, or are we going to continue to do what we do because it is important for this country that we do it. We have to think more strategic. We have to be more considerate of the dangers that we might unwittingly put our fellow citizens in. At the same time, we have to weigh that against the crucial importance of getting information out. We are not going to become prosperous. We are not going to be a hub for any damn thing if we are governed by fear and hopelessness. Or indeed, just as important, apathy, where the majority of people don't really care. So the challenge comes back to us. What is it that we want to do to save this country, if indeed this country is ours? Many years ago, I was in a conversation with some people, and they were talking about an election in which they said, oh, the upper middle class are flying to Singapore and wherever else because they don't want to be in Colombo at the time of the election, because there might be violence, there might be curfews, etc., so they could take a break and go. Other people were supposed to have, it was happening on such and such a day of the week, they have this to do, they have that to do, whatever. I remember a foreigner turning around and asking that question, who does this country really belong to? Who does this country really belong to? How many people with any degree of power and resources really want to stay here or get out? From the middle classes right down to the young men and women in the rural areas of this country who think that going to the Middle East or wherever is going to make their world. And that, I think, are the real questions about sovereignty, about patriotism, about love of country. Those are the real questions in terms of what we are willing to do. Geneva, in that sense, Geneva 2014, throws us a challenge of more serious proportions than ever before. Either we recognize and step up to the plate and fulfill our duties and responsibilities as citizens yearning for a democratic Sri Lanka, or we just remain as subjects. Thank you.